And the first talk is on the topic Information Theoretically Secure MPC against Mixed Dynamic Adversaries. The paper is by Ivan Damgard, Daniel Escudero, and Divya Ravi. And Divya is going to give the talk. Go ahead, Divya.
Thank you. So this work is about information theoretically secure MPC against mixed dynamic adversary based on a joint work with Ivan Damgard and Daniel Escudero. So let me begin with a quick introduction to what MPC means. Suppose you have n mutually distrusting parties out of which t are corrupt, and they want to compute some combined function on their private inputs. And MPC gives them a way to do so while ensuring that everyone gets the correct output and that nothing beyond the function output is revealed. Now, in this work, we focus on information theoretic MPC, where we assume the adversary to be computationally unbounded. And this includes perfectly secure protocols where no error is allowed and statistically secure protocols where negligible error is allowed. Now, let's look at classifications of adversary based on the kind of misbehavior that they are allowed. So the weakest one is the passive or the semi-honest adversary. And here the corrupt parties are honest but curious. That is, they follow the protocol steps, but the adversary can see their internal state. Now, in such a model, information theoretic security is known to be possible if the number of passive corruptions is less than n by 2. A stronger model is the active or malicious adversary, where the corrupt parties can deviate from the protocol arbitrarily. And in this model, statistical security is known to be possible if 2TA is less than n, but for perfect security, you require 3TA to be less than n. The third model is that of the mixed adversary, where the adversary is allowed to make different types of corruption simultaneously. So this adversary is allowed to make TP passive corruptions, TA active corruptions, and TF fail-stop corruptions, where he can instruct these fail-stop parties to abort, but he cannot see their internal state. So in this model, it's known that statistical security is possible if 2TA plus 2TP plus TF is less than n, and there is a similar inequality for the case of perfect security, which has 3TA instead. So if you look closely, this actually generalizes the bounds that we saw earlier for the passive and the active case. And these were presented in the work of Fitzy and others. And they showed that these bounds are also sufficient. So in particular, they showed that if you take a fixed tuple, TA, TP, and TF, satisfying such an inequality, then there exists a protocol. Now, an important point is that if you take, say, two different tuples satisfying this inequality, then what their result says is that there exist two different protocols. But what we are interested in is having a single protocol that works for any tuple that satisfies this inequality. And this is exactly what the dynamic adversary model is. And we want to understand that under what conditions is it possible to get information theoretic security against such a dynamic adversary. And this was introduced by the work of Hurt and others in 2013, this model of dynamic adversary. And both in their work and a subsequent work by Patra et al., they focused on the case of computational security. And we are focusing on information theoretic security. But even information theoretic dynamic adversary has indirectly been studied by these works in 2008 because they consider a general mixed adversary model. And you can think of dynamic adversary as being a threshold version of this one. I refer to the paper for further detailed comparison on this. Now, let me list our contributions. First, we explored the case of statistical security, where we begin with the assumption that the adversary respects this inequality. So this is needed even in the non-dynamic case. So it would be needed in the dynamic case as well. So for this, we showed that for SFE protocols, even the strongest guarantee of guaranteed output delivery is possible. But this comes at the cost of increased round complexity. So we showed that even if you just need fairness, you still need to incur round complexity that grows linearly in the number of parties. So this actually shows a separation between the dynamic and the non-dynamic case, because in the non-dynamic case, you can get constant round protocols, at least for some restricted classes of functions. Next, for reactive MPC, we showed that fairness is possible, but it turns out that GOD additionally would require this constraint of R plus F being less than N, where R is the maximum number of states that the adversary can read. So this would include the active and the passive corruptions, and F is the maximum number of players that the adversary can crush. So this would include the active and the fail-stop corruptions. Next, we explored the case of perfect security. And again, we begin with the inequality needed even in the non-dynamic case. So for this, the picture was more on the negative side. And particularly for SFE, we showed that it's impossible and continues to be impossible, even if you just want the weakest notion of security with a bot, and you don't even allow the adversary to use fail-stop corruptions. But on the positive side, it's still possible in some cases. For example, when either you restrict TA to be 0 or you restrict TP to be 0. Next, we explored the specific reactive functionality of VSS. So note that the negative results for SFE generally don't extend to VSS. And for this, we showed that GOD is impossible even if TF is 0. But fair VSS is possible, and even GOD is possible in some cases. So here we chose to explore the cases when either TA is 0 or TP is 0. And for each of them, we showed what the optimal bounds would be. But there can also be different other kinds of trade-offs when each of TA, TP, and TF are non-zero. So that is something that we are left to explore in future work. So with this, I conclude my talk and refer to our paper for further details. Thank you.
Thank you for the great talk, Divya. So any questions from the room, or I don't think there are any questions in this group chat? Yeah. But a quick question. So in the case of computational security, you had like the lower bound for information theoretic security as well as perfect security, or statistical and imperfect security. For computational security, what are the equations that need to satisfy in terms of TA, TP, and FTF?
In the computational one, they did not consider fail-stop corruption. They just considered the active and the passive one, and it was 2 TA plus TP is less than N. That was what the condition turned out to be for the case of.
Is it tight?
Yes, it is also tight. Yeah. So even for the dynamic case, so the first work had explored, they had both the upper and the lower bounds, and the second work they explored the round complexity of such protocols.
And any questions or just one more follow-up? So you also talked about trying to have like one general protocol that sort of fits all DA, DAP, DF parameters. So suppose if I ask you that, okay, hey, you still want to compile all these different protocols for different perfect or statistical security, but maybe I give you some sort of computational tool. I give you like an encryption system. Then can you sort of compress all these different protocols into a single protocol using computational assumptions? I'm not sure if that question makes sense, but I'm just trying to come up with a generic compiler for aggregating all these different templates into one using a computational assumption.
So I think that like maybe some of the subprotocols, you can try to have it in a hybrid model, like in a HOTI hybrid model or something. But I mean, I think the conditions may change in that case. Like that's actually interesting, but I need to think a bit more. But if I just think of our upper bounds, I think that some of the some of the limitations were because we don't have the corresponding information theoretic tool. But if we had an ideal call to such a OT hybrid or something, then maybe maybe we can get some better feasibility. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, Divya. So if there are no further questions, yeah, let's just move on to the second talk, which will be an in-person talk too. So that's great. Okay. This one.
Yes.
Okay. I'll do this trick. So okay, it's great to have an in-person talk in the online session, supposedly online session. But yeah, so the next talk will be on actively secure elementary MPC reductions. And the paper is by Benny Applebaum and Arushi Goel, and Arushi is going to give a talk.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so this is joint work with Benny Applebaum. Okay.
It's not working.
So this is just my quintessential slide on the definition of MPC, which I'm going to skip because Divya already covered this. So let's start. So since its inception, the design of MPC protocols have quite heavily relied on the notion of secure reductions. And we say that the task of securely computing a particular function securely reduces to the task of computing a different and a simpler function G if there exists a protocol that computes F where the parties have oracle access to the simpler function G. And given this kind of protocol, all we need now is to design a secure protocol for the simpler functionality. Many classical protocols, for example, that by Yao and Goldreich et al., essentially construct protocols that can be viewed as secure reductions to the two-party OT functionality. Going a step ahead, we say that the task of securely computing a function F non-interactively reduces to the task of computing a function G if in this particular protocol, the parties only make single queries to this oracle G and don't interact with each other at all. In our work, we consider the notion of elementary reductions. These are non-interactive reductions where the function G is that of a constant degree. And moreover, the reduction is makes use of a PRG in a black box way. This additionally requires that the function G is entirely independent of the PRG. Such black box restrictions typically make things much faster. And also many classical reductions already capture this notion of elementary reductions, which I will go over in a couple of slides. Okay, so like to summarize a little bit about how elementary reductions look like, we have the set of parties who run some local pre-processing functions on their respective inputs. These pre-processing functions can make oracle queries to the PRG. The output of these pre-processing functions are sent by the parties to the oracle G. And finally, the output of this oracle G is post-processed by the parties using some post-processing function to compute the final output. Note that here, both the pre-processing and post-processing functions are allowed to make oracle queries to the PRG, but the function G is entirely independent of it, and the parties do not interact with each other whatsoever. Okay, so like I said, many classical reductions are in fact elementary. For instance, the two-party protocol by Yao and the multi-party protocol of Beaver, Micali, and Rogowe in the semi-honest setting can be viewed as an elementary reduction from all efficiently computable functions in the dishonest majority setting. Beaver, Micali, and Rogowe also had a maliciously secure variant based on zero knowledge, but that protocol was interactive. That reduction was interactive, and the oracle G in that case depended on the PRG. In the malicious setting, however, we either know of elementary reductions only in the honest majority setting, or only for low depth circuits, or only ones that achieve the weaker notion of security with a what. Unfortunately, we don't know of any elementary reduction that is fully maliciously secure. That is, it achieves guaranteed output delivery for all efficiently computable functions. Applebaum et al. Present a non-elementary, non-interactive reduction in this setting, but the function G in their case depends on the PRG. So naturally, the question that we address in this work is whether an elementary reduction exists in this setting. And we show that an elementary reduction that achieves full security in this setting is unlikely to exist, but one that achieves identifiable abort does indeed exist. Let me now elaborate on these contributions a little bit. So to establish our lower bound, we show that for two parties, existence of such an elementary reduction that achieves partial fairness, that is where fairness is only guaranteed when one of the parties is corrupt, implies existence of an information theoretic elementary reduction for all efficiently computable functions in the CRS model with inverse polynomial average case privacy against passive adversaries. And here by information theoretic reduction, I mean that the parties are not even allowed to make black box calls to the PRG. And while we don't achieve an unconditional impossibility, the implications of this particular result statement are quite non-trivial because they imply existence of constant round protocols that are far beyond the current state of the art. For instance, existence of this kind of information theoretic reduction would imply a two-party constant round protocol for all efficiently computable functions that achieves inverse polynomial average case information theoretic security in the OT hybrid model. which in turn would imply a constant round protocol for 3 parties with inverse polynomial average case information theoretic security for all efficiently computable functions. And this is a well-known 3-decade-old problem. Although the original problem was stated for the standard notion of security, it doesn't seem like this relaxation of security gives us any more advantage or makes the problem any more tractable. For our positive result, we show that an elementary reduction that achieves identifiable abort for dishonest majority for all efficiently computable functions does exist. And a similar reduction was in fact also implicit in a recent work of Baum et al. We also show that if the parties are allowed to interact with the oracle G more than once, then it's possible to achieve fairness. And finally, it's possible to achieve full security if the function G is allowed to depend on the PRG. In fact, any passively secure elementary reduction can be transformed into an actively secure one if the function G is allowed to depend on the PRG. Thank you.
Thanks, Archie, for the great talk. Any questions from the room or on the chat? There's nothing in the chat. Okay, so maybe just a quick question, just to understand. You said that you get this 3-round protocol with inverse polynomial security with these implications. Three-party protocols. So in encryption and other primitives, we know that inverse polynomial security can be amplified to full security by sort of using secret sharing tricks. Can you sort of hope to have like a similar theorem here that sort of any protocol with inverse polynomial security can be amplified to a protocol with full security, independent of the number of parties?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. So the only reason we say that sort of this, the reason that we say that this sort of there is this implication is that sort of the rest of the reduction remains the same. It's just how you implement sort of the function G, right?
So if the function G is simple enough, then
the function G is a constant constant degree function. So that can be implemented, whatever, like we know how to implement that in constant round, but I'm not sure how we can get rid of like the inverse polynomial dependence, security that arise, whatever, as part of the reduction.
Okay, great. Any further questions from the audience or the chat? I don't think so. So, okay. So yeah, thanks again. Let's just move on to the next. So the next talk is on environmentally friendly composable MPC in the plain model from standard timed assumptions, and the result is by Brandon Rodna, Jeremiah Mesher, John Muller-Quad, and Jeremiah is going to give the talk. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. So secure multi-party computation allows mutually distrusting parties beyond the PN to jointly perform tasks like secure function evaluation, where the parties evaluate a function with private inputs, to host the first prize bid auction, where only the highest bid and the winner are revealed, the intersection of sets, where nothing but the intersection is there.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you think you can speak a little bit louder? It's difficult to hear you in the room. Maybe a little more?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, this will be better.
Of course. Okay, thank you. So more generally, MPC can be used to perform arbitrary computations in a secure way. And for MPC protocols, we usually require properties like correctness, secrecy, or the independence of inputs. And in reality, protocols are seldom executed in isolation. And we thus want these properties to hold even if the MPC protocol is executed along arbitrary other protocols. Said differently, we want the security to hold under protocol composition. A suitable notion for the security of protocols in a setting where other arbitrary protocols may be executed concurrently is universally composable security introduced by Canetti. It can be shown that this strong security notion cannot be fulfilled in the plain model, where only authenticated communication and complexity assumptions are available. Instead, a trusted setup, such as a common reference string, a public key infrastructure, or random oracle is necessary. As the reliance on the setup might be undesirable, there's a long list of security notions and protocols featuring composable MPC in the plain model without a setup. common to all the approaches listed above is that the simulation is achieved by giving the simulator a complexity advantage over the environment. As a consequence, the simulation is not efficient and cannot be carried out in uniform polynomial time. And this non-polynomial time simulation leads to a number of drawbacks. The first is limited environmental friendliness, which was introduced by Canetti and Pass. Very informally, environmental friendliness means that the non-polynomial time simulation, as can be seen on the right side, may affect the security of other protocols that are executed concurrently. As an example, think of the superpolynomial time simulator creating a commitment that may help an adversary in another protocol if the considered commitment scheme is non-malleable. With UC security, this does not happen as the simulator runs in polynomial time. But there are also different disadvantages. For example, when the simulator is giving superpolynomial advice, this advice may contain secrets of protocols that have started previously. This is true even if these protocols are secure against non-uniform adversaries, like in the case of UC security. Such non-uniform simulation can also negatively affect the security of other protocols, which is undesirable. Yet another drawback of previous approaches is the limited UC reusability. Suppose that we construct a composable commitment scheme that is, for example, SPS secure. Due to the superpolynomial simulation, we cannot plug this commitment scheme into arbitrary UC secure MPC protocols in the FCOM hybrid model, because the simulation can negatively affect complexity assumptions made inside the MPC protocol. So the reusability of UC protocols is limited under notions that allow MPC in the plane model. In order to prevent these drawbacks, we use timed assumptions in addition to polynomial time hardness assumptions. These timed assumptions can be broken by a simulator in polynomial time. As the environment also runs in polynomial time, we can only hope for a temporary advantage for the simulator in such a setting. To give you an idea, we will use timed commitments that are extractable for the simulator at a time when they are still hiding for the environment. The small advantage is sufficient to achieve composability. Later on, the environment will also be able to extract such timed commitments. The environment having the same power as the simulator doesn't have its previous solutions and has to be accounted for in the protocol design by transforming a short-term trapdoor into a long-term trapdoor. Polynomial time simulation doesn't affect polynomial time hardness assumptions anymore. This leads to full environmental friendliness to previously started protocols, and to UC reusability. Unfortunately, we do not achieve full composability. By using timed assumptions in addition to polynomial time hardness assumptions, we can achieve composable MPC in the plane model with properties that go beyond the state of the art. Our first result is a composable commitment scheme in the plane model. It's fully environmentally friendly, constant round, makes black boxes towards building blocks only, and can be constructed from standard and standard timed hardness assumptions. Also, its simulation is uniform. Using this commitment scheme, we construct a composable general MPC protocol in the plane model with the same properties. And by using timed hardness assumptions, we are the first to achieve these properties in the plane model. Last but not least, we also propose a variant of UC security to analyze the security of all constructions. This notion is called TLOC, which is short for time lock UC. In contrast to UC security, this allows the use of time primitives like timed commitment schemes. As TLOC is mathematically a special case of UC security, no changes to the framework are required. TLOC security is fully environmentally friendly, fully UC compatible, features full UC reusability, and the single instance competence theorem. This concludes my talk, and thanks for your attention.
So, any questions from the room, or is there a chat? So maybe a quick question is that, or maybe I missed the first part of the talk, but what's the purpose of using just relying on timed assumptions here? Can you sort of
please repeat the question?
So what's the purpose of just relying on timed assumptions here? It's like, is the notion timed? I mean, because timed assumptions are only known from a very specific set of computational hardness assumptions, right? I'm just trying to understand whether it's like the notion of timed assumptions is necessary here. You can sort of just try to rely on other more general assumptions.
The use of timed assumptions is very crucial here. So we have seen that the disadvantages of previous results for composable MPC are because the simulator runs in superpolynomial time, so to say. And this can affect the security of other protocols. But when using timed assumptions, we can have a polynomial time simulation, and we cannot achieve this using polynomial time hardness assumptions. So we have to use something new, like a timed commitment scheme. So this is crucial, the reliance on timed assumptions, which can be broken in polynomial time.
I see. So you're saying, so basically to get around the complexity leveraging issue, and actually don't have to sort of break things in polynomial time. That's why you want to sort of rely on time assumptions.
Yes.
Could there be any other, could you sort of guess that maybe you could rely on some other sort of type of hardness, because timing is like one type of hardness, maybe some other source of hardness like space constraints issues, or some other type of hardness assumptions where you can sort of rely on some type of other, because basically you're trying to rely on, there should be a difference between what the adversary can do and what the reduction can do. And that dichotomy can either be super polynomial time based, or in your case, timed assumptions. Maybe something else could be sort of thought of, trying to get these same things.
Yes, I think this is a very general approach, and of course has been used for many years. So you could, of course, explore space hardness assumptions or something like that, whatever you want. But I think timed assumptions have seen some use in practice, for example, in blockchain. So there's at least some practical evidence, like people are betting money on this, literally, that timed assumptions seem to work right now. So I think they are interesting. An interesting avenue to pursue. And in our protocols, what is a nice property is, even if those timed assumptions turn out to be wrong later after the protocol, the security of our construction is unaffected. So the timed assumptions only need to hold during the protocol execution, during a very short time frame. And later on, they may break down and the protocol will remain secure as long as your standard polynomial hardness assumptions, which you use later on the protocol, remain secure.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thanks a lot, gentlemen. So if there are no further questions, let's just move to the second, the next talk of the session. Yeah. So I think Martin is going to give the talk. Martin, could you share your slides, please? Share mine. Yeah. Okay. So the next talk is, the next result is on communication. Yeah.
Okay.
So the next talk is on communication efficient asynchronous MPC with adaptive security. The result is by Anik Chopard, Martin Hurd, and Chenja Luzong. And Martin is going to give the talk.
Hi, everybody. So also this is on multi-party computation. We have the usual setting, and parties, T of them are corrupted. Parties are pairwisely connected with communication channels. And they want to evaluate some circuit. Each input is given by one of the parties, and the outputs are given to the entitled parties. Now, the setting we are interested in is the asynchronous setting, which means that messages on the channels can be delayed arbitrarily. The adversary can control that. And we are interested in adaptive corruption, which means that the adversary corrupts parties during the protocol executions, and depending on information gathered so far. And the security level we're going to achieve is computational security. And in this setting, asynchronous channels and adaptive corrupt, or actually just asynchronous channels, the best possible corruption threshold is T smaller n over 3. So a lot of work has been done in the asynchronous setting. It all started with Benoit Kelmer-Rabin in 1994. And lots of protocols have been published since then. However, many of these protocols only achieve static security, whereas we are interested in adaptive security. And here you can see that in the adaptive setting, the best achieved communication complexity so far is n to the 4, which means n to the 4 messages need to be communicated per multiplication in the circuit. Now, so far, adaptive security and information theoretic security was the same. That is, all the adaptively secure protocols actually achieve information theoretic security, and the cryptographic protocols achieve static security. And what we asked the question whether we can do more efficient adaptive security, potentially at the price of cryptographic security only. Our results are the following. We provide 2 protocols. The first protocol tolerates T smaller n over 3 corruptions, which is optimal, and it communicates n squared per multiplication. This is the same communication complexity that was achieved so far in the static setting if we do not consider somewhat homomorphic encryption or fully homomorphic encryption. And then we have a second protocol which achieves linear communication complexity O of n per multiplication. However, this protocol has a slightly lower corruption threshold, slightly below n/3. And it also has lots of assumptions. It assumes security ratios, non-interactive zero knowledge proofs, and it also assumes atomic send. Atomic send means that the party can send a message to all parties it wants at once, atomically. That is, the party cannot be corrupted during sending the operation. During the send operation, it can be corrupted before or afterwards, but not during the sending. How does our protocol work? Well, we follow the CDN approach, which means that we assume a homomorphic threshold encryption scheme, for example, barrière. That's homomorphic only with respect to addition, not with respect to multiplication. And we assume that the secret key is shared among the parties. And then we use beaver circuit randomization technique. That is, in a preparation phase, we prepare multiplication triples, A, B, C, where in our case, as we work with encryptions, A, B, and C will be encryptions, and the plain text of A and B multiplied to the plain text of C. Now, how do we do the preparation phase? So in the first protocol, we just follow the standard CDN approach, meaning first each party contributes a value for A, and then the sum of these values will be the real A, and then the parties contribute values for B and C, and the sum of those values will be the actual B and C. And in each step, we do a core set agreement. That is, we choose a subset of the parties who actually correctly provided their contributions, and we only consider those parties. This protocol has complexity n² per multiplication. And then in order to bring this down to O of n, we use secret committees. A secret committee is kind of a setup assumption. That means that a party knows that it is in a committee. It also can prove so, but other parties do not know who is in the committee. And then only parties in the first, respectively in the second committee, would provide contributions for A, respectively for BC. And in the computation phase, we use the multiplication trick of the public reconstruction of Dampart-Nielsen for the multiplication. And now, how do we achieve adaptive security? So far, I didn't talk at all about adaptive security. In the preparation phase, adaptive security is for free because we only have random triples. The simulator will actually not cheat. The simulator will execute the standard protocol. So there is no issue with adaptive security. In the computation phase, we use the DN trick. That is, we assume there is a K, which is an encryption of 1 in the real world and an encryption of 0 in the simulation. And this makes that all the real encryptions in the simulation will be encryptions of 0. Now we need to talk about how to extract inputs from the corrupted parties. We need to talk about how the simulator can adjust the output to whatever it needs to be. But this is just standard technique from DNO3. So summarizing, we provide two protocols in the paper. The first one with n² complexity, the second one with linear complexity, where the second one has a little bit lower corruption threshold and has a bunch of assumptions. And it's an open problem to achieve linear communication complexity in the asynchronous model with adaptive security in the standard model. Thank you for your attention.
So, Martin, for the talk. So there's a question in this chat by Anirudh, and the question is, how can the secret committees be set up?
Well, the easiest way is just to assume this as a setup assumption. We have set up anyway, right? We need a sharing of the secret key for the homomorphic encryption scheme. So we just assume this as a setup.
Are there any follow-up questions to that, or is that that answers the questions? Okay. So one, just to understand, what do you think is the what tricks do you need to sort of get to this open question? What are the barriers to sort of this quadratic blow up with respect to n?
How to bring it down? Well,
I mean, what do you feel it's like? Maybe it's like these are the tricks that one might need to come up with. What's the barrier?
The computation stage we have is linear time, right? It's only about the preparation. What we need in the preparation phase is that the party can kind of provide the B and C together with the proofs. And if you just do this naturally, I mean, one could amortize there. This would be the standard approach that people in the synchronous setting are doing. But if you want to amortize in the asynchronous setting, the problem is that you will have two core set agreements in a row, which means in the first core set agreement, you go to a subset of n-t parties, but then you need a second core set agreement where you have only n-2t parties. And in the worst case, this n-2t party only contains one honest party, and then we lose amortization. So it might be that for lower threshold, but probably not negligibly close to n/3, but a bit far away, one could do linear complexity. We tried several attempts, but I mean, as you can see, we could not achieve without the committee trick.
And maybe like this might be a stupid question, but can you amortize against different runs of the protocol? Can you sort of just reuse this, since it's a preparation phase, right? Can you sort of make sure that for different runs of the protocol, you can amortize, you can have to just do the preparation once for multiple different runs?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So I'm just trying to understand. So it's in the preparation phase that you have to sort of have this flow, right? Can this be reused across different runs of the protocol?
Well,
between the same parties.
We have in the preparation phase, in our case, it's just once you produce as many triplets as you need, right? It's just once.
Okay.
But the triplets you cannot reuse, but the preparation phase actually it's not in blocks. We don't have segmentation or something like that. It's not needed in this case here.
I see. Yeah.
I mean, in the synchronous setting, when you look at protocols like DH08 or these linear time protocols, usually they would work in blocks, and then they do player elimination, dispute control, whatever, and then in each block they have potentially less corruptions. So a block succeeds either, or if it fails, then next time we have less corruptions. And things like that we did not achieve to make it work in the asynchronous setting.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. So thanks for the great talk. So I think next talk is also online, and Gilad, can you share your slides, please? Okay. Gilad, you're muted.
Hi, can you see the slides?
Yeah, we can see the slides, yes. So, okay. So the next talk is on efficient, perfectly secure computation with optimal residence. And this is a joint work between Itai Abraham, Gilad Ashraf, and Avishai and I. And Gilad is going to give the talk.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about efficient, perfectly secure computation with optimal resilience. I'm Gilad Ashraf from Bar-Ilan University, and this is a joint work with Itai Abraham and Avishai and I. So in the setting of secure multi-party computation, we have some set of parties, each has some private inputs. And the parties want to compute some joint function of their inputs while preserving some security properties, such as privacy, correctness, and so on. We know that any function can be securely computed, and one of the seminal results in secure computation is that of BGW from '88, which shows that in the perfect settings, semi-honest is possible with perfect security, assuming that at most half of the parties are corrupted. And in the malicious settings, we need at most 1/3 of the parties are corrupted. What is the communication? Both of the results are tight, and perfect security means also that the adversary can be computationally unbounded, and protocols in these settings are usually also adaptively secure and secure under concurrent compositions once they satisfy some natural requirements. What's the communication complexity of the protocol? So if you want to compute a function f, we first describe it as an arithmetic circuit C. And then the semi-honest case, we have to pay the total communication complexity over the all channels is n squared time the size of the circuit. In the malicious case, it's n to the 4 in the optimistic case and n to the 6 time of the circuit in the pessimistic case. And we have two cases because the adversary can slow down the protocol but cannot harm security. So optimal is when it doesn't slow down the protocol, and optimistic is when it doesn't slow down, and pessimistic is in the case it does succeed to slow down the protocol. Our result, so we show how to improve the malicious case, and we reduce the communication complexity to n to the 3 times the size of the circuit in the optimistic case, and n to the 4 times C in the pessimistic case. So we improve both the optimistic and pessimistic case. If we want to look at another view of our improvement is as follows. So in the BGW semi-honest, the number of secrets the parties have to share is n per each multiplication gate. So in total, we have n times the communication complexity of the secret sharing per multiplication. In the malicious case, we have n squared times the communication complexity of a stronger secret sharing scheme of verifiable secret sharing, when the dealer can be malicious and parties can be malicious. In our case, in our result, we show how to improve, and the number of secrets or values that we have to secret share during the malicious case goes down to n, to linear per each multiplication. We also have some bonus, and this is an interesting part of the paper. So we show that if we have a circuit G that has n inputs and m outputs of multiplication depth 1, in other words, we have some polynomial of degree 2. I want you to think about G as very large, while L and M are relatively small. To compute such a circuit, BGW requires the amount of VSSs that is proportional to the size of the input plus the number of multiplications in the circuit G. We show a way to do it, a way to compute it. Protocol achieves just the amount of VSSs that is proportional to the size of the input and size of the output, and is independent of number of multiplications in G. Note that this means, in particular, that the communication complexity is sublinear in the circuit size. The technique for that is somewhat similar to the R1CS in zero knowledge, and for the best of our knowledge, this is the first time that this happens in the perfect security setting. As an example where this is useful, consider the task of matrix multiplication. So this is a task where, let's say I have some matrix A, you have some matrix B, and we want to compute the multiplication of the two matrices. So if we implement this circuit, at least naively, the size of the input is m squared for both of us, also the size of the output, but the circuit itself requires m to the 3 m cube multiplications. So BGW will require n squared times m cube, the communication complexity of VSS, while our protocol is just n times m squared. So we both improve n, and this will work for any circuit. And for some circuits, we can apply this technique where the circuits are wide enough, where we can actually also be independent of the number of multiplications and just look at the number of wires that we have. Some related work. So our setting is the case of constant round per multiplication with perfect security, malicious security, and optimal resilience. Optimal resilience, we mean and the number of corrupted parties is n over 3. In that case, we achieve this communication complexity, n to the 3 optimistic, n to the 4 pessimistic, and the round complexity is the depth of the circuit. There are more efficient protocols if you look just at the communication complexity, but those are protocols that are based on player elimination. They come up with a price where now the round complexity is also depends on the number of parties, which essentially means that for large circuits, large depth circuits, this can be a bit pricey. Moreover, for circuits with multiplication depth 1, which is the task which we are focused on, we can obtain communication complexity that depends only on the size of the input and output and is independent of the number of multiplications. And it is unclear if we can take those techniques to those this line of protocols. So formally, I would say if you have this kind of circuit, our protocol can be more efficient. If you have large depth circuit, then there's no question that you need to go on this line of protocols. And that's it for this talk. Thanks.
Any questions from the room? I don't think there are any questions in the chat as well. So, Gilad, just a quick question. Do you think, is there a way to combine your protocol and these other protocols which has the high long complexity to get the best of both worlds?
I believe you can. You can do things that when you get like a large depth, you will use the player elimination technique.
Is it as simple as sort of just a black box combination of the protocols, or it's like you have to be much more careful?
No, this is it should be a future work. I mean,
it should be a future
to actually
work
on, to work on the details, and there should be some kind of a shell convention and so on.
I think Alessandra is saying that she wants to work on the future. Oh, I see. But yeah, okay, great. So any further questions? If not, let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
The next talk is an in-person talk again. So yeah, I think. So sixth talk of the session is on the topic of communication models and best achievable security in two-round MPC. The talk is, the paper is by Arushi Goel, Abhishek Jain, Manoj Prabhakaran, and Rajiv Raghunath, and Arushi is going to give the talk.
Thanks for the introduction. Hi again. So this is joint work with Abhishek Jain, Manoj Prabhakaran, and Rajiv Raghunath. So the two main communication models that are used in the design of most interactive protocols are broadcast. Is a broadcast channel that allows a sender to send the same message to multiple parties, and point-to-point channels that allow parties to exchange private messages with each other. These communication models play a fundamental role in helping decide what kind of security is achievable and what assumptions are needed to achieve those securities. In this setting, we explore the role of these communication models in the two-round MPC setting. 2 rounds are considered minimal for MPC since 1 round is known to be impossible. And in the 2-round setting, a lot of recent works have made significant advancements. In particular, these works establish feasibility of general computation in 2 rounds, while relying essentially on minimal assumptions. In particular, the question that we consider is the following. So in 2-round MPC, in the honest majority setting, where the adversary is only allowed to corrupt a minority of the parties, what security notions are achievable in the different communication models, and what assumptions are needed for achieving them. In this work, we primarily focus on the plain model that is without any trusted setup. But sometimes we're going to augment this plain model with an untrusted public key infrastructure, also known as a paired PKI. Okay, so before diving into the main results, let me quickly recall some standard security notions that are used in MPC. So the most basic one is, of course, just privacy against semi-honest or honest but curious adversaries. For malicious security, we have a range of different notions, starting with security with a bot, that in which the adversary might prevent the honest parties from learning the output by prematurely aborting. And this notion itself consists of three increasingly strong variants, the weakest of which is selective abort, where the adversary might selectively force some of the parties to abort. In unanimous abort, the parties all either abort or they all agree on the correct output. Identifiable abort is similar to unanimous abort with the added advantage that if the honest parties are forced to output bot, they're also able to identify at least one corrupt party that caused the bot. And finally, the strongest notion of all is that of guaranteed output delivery, which ensures that irrespective of the adversarial strategy, the honest parties are always going to be able to compute the output. We can also consider a variant of guaranteed output delivery that's against just fail-stop adversaries as opposed to fully malicious adversaries, where fail-stop adversaries are ones that behave like semi-honest adversaries, but might prematurely abort. And so collectively, we get these two hierarchies of security notions. Going back to the two-round MPC and what is known about existing protocol. So we're going to consider all of the security notions that I mentioned on the previous slide. And for communication models, we'll look at the broadcast-only setting, the point-to-point only setting, a combination of the two, and the broadcast-only setting augmented with the pair PKI. Okay, so for semi-honest security, we have results, feasibility results in all of these communication models. For fail-stop guaranteed output delivery, we have an impossibility result in the broadcast-only setting, but do have a feasibility result in all of the remaining communication models. Similarly, for selective abort, we have feasibility results in all communication models except the broadcast-only setting. And for unanimous abort, identifiable abort, and malicious guaranteed output delivery, we again have impossibilities in some communication models. And finally, for unanimous abort, we have a feasibility result in the broadcast plus P2P and broadcast plus PKI setting. Now, together, all of these results leave the question of feasibility of two-round MPC in these remaining settings unresolved. And in this work, we provide answers to all of these questions, thereby completing this picture. In particular, we show that any kind of security with a bot in two rounds is impossible over just broadcast channels. And for this, we start by showing that any two-round honest majority MPC over just broadcast channels in the plain model implies a two-message oblivious transfer protocol. If we start with a semi-honest protocol, we end up with a semi-honest oblivious transfer protocol. And if we start with a malicious one, we end up with a malicious OT. And this implication holds both in the plain model and in the CRS model. Also, this implication helps justify the use of OT in the work of Garg et al. And Benamuda et al. In their design of a semi-honest protocol in the broadcast-only setting. Next, we prove that a two-message maliciously secure OT is impossible in the plain model. And these two results combined show that any kind of malicious security in the broadcast-only setting is essentially impossible in two rounds. In the broadcast and P2P setting, we show that even identifiable abort is impossible. And on the positive side, we show that guaranteed output delivery and hence identifiable abort are both achievable in the broadcast plus PKI setting. And so now together, these results help us establish the following hierarchy of communication models in the two-round setting, starting with the broadcast plus PKI setting, which allows us to achieve the strongest notion, that is guaranteed output delivery. Slightly weaker than that is broadcast plus point-to-point, then point-to-point, and the weakest of them is the broadcast-only setting that only allows us to achieve semi-honest security. Thank you.
Any questions from the room? Or the Zurich chat? So maybe if I can ask a quick question. So do you know about the model where you can sort of potentially reuse the first round?
Yeah.
And so what happens to the picture when you can sort of work in these non-interactive secure computation settings where you can reuse the first round? Does the picture stay the same or does it?
I don't think we know sort of enough about the, I don't think we know enough about the reusable, like especially in the two-round setting. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think we even know of just a simple maliciously secure protocol in any communication model in the reusable setting.
So
I think that requires some sort of setup in the plain model. I don't think we know of
I
result,
see.
but I could be wrong.
Okay, I see. I'm just interested if the lower bounds and positive risks are to match over there or not.
Right. So the lower bounds will definitely sort of carry over,
over.
but the positive results,
Mm.
these don't.
Okay.
But yeah, like I think we have a far less understanding for the reusable MPC.
Any further questions? No? Okay, so thanks again, Archie, for the talk. And yeah, we're to the last talk of the session. So maybe, can you share your slides? Are you? Can you speak up a little bit?
Can you see the slides?
Yes, yeah, we can see the slides. Okay. So the last talk of this, the MPC session, the first MPC session is on generalized pseudorandom secret sharing and efficient straggler resilient secure computation. The work is by Fabrice Menamuda, Elec Boyle, Neil Gilboa, Shai Halevi, Yavale Shai, and Ariel is going to give the talk.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So, so this talk is just yet another work on the very popular setting of multi-party computation with an honest majority. So in this setting, we have n parties who wish to compute jointly some functionality over their private inputs in the presence of t corrupted parties, and n must be equal or larger than 2t plus 1. And the reason why this setting is so popular because in this setting, we can achieve highly efficient protocols that are either information theoretic or only make a black box use of cheap symmetric crypto, which is what we are interested in this work. Now, within the honest majority setting, we can distinguish between two subsettings. The weak honest majority setting, where n is exactly 2t plus 1, which is the minimal number of parties required to maintain the honest majority, and strong honest majority, where n is strictly larger than 2t plus 1. And the main question that we ask in this work is what can we gain in terms of concrete efficiency from allowing strong honest majority? Now, this question may sound a bit strange at first glance because we are used to think that in cryptographic protocols, we have a trade-off between security and efficiency, right? And so if we reduce the security threshold, we can improve the efficiency. However, this is not true for the honest majority setting. And to see this, consider the task of evaluating an arithmetic circuit over secret shared inputs. So the best semi-honest protocol that we have in this in the honest majority setting is the Damgard-Nistel protocol with the communication cost that is shown here. And over the years, it was easier to achieve malicious security as we reduced the threshold, but recent works have closed the gap completely between semi-honest and malicious security for both the strong and the weak honest majority setting. So now the cost with malicious security is the same, or at least in the amortized sense, as for semi-honest security. So now let's assume that we want to run a maliciously secure protocol in the strong honest majority setting. So now we have two options. One is to run a protocol in the strong honest majority setting, but the second will be to let the parties share their inputs to 2t plus 1 parties and let them run the protocol for them. And it is almost straightforward to see that if we will use the second option, then this will yield less communication. So it is not clear what do we gain from running running a protocol in the strong honest majority setting. A different direction that has been considered in this setting is to evaluate multiple gates together at the same cost of a single gate. And this is done using packed Shamir secret sharing, where you store L secrets on the same polynomial. So now the degree of the polynomial that we use throughout the computation is t plus L, which we denote by d, and the number of parties must be equal or larger than 2d plus 1. Now, if we evaluate SAMD circuits, where you have many copies of the same circuit in parallel, then this gives an immediate improvement by a factor of L for both communication and computation, which is, of course, significant. However, for evaluating general circuits or non-SAMD circuits, previous works could only achieve asymptotic efficiency, but with high concrete costs for routing secrets between blocks when moving from one layer of the circuit to the next layer. So our question remains still: what can we gain in terms of compute efficiency when we want to evaluate a general arithmetic circuit? And in this talk, we present several techniques for the strong honest majority setting, where we improve communication, computational cost, storage, and latency. All of our constructions are based on pseudo-random secret sharing, PRSS, which allows us to generate pseudo-random Shamir secret sharing without interaction from a set of replicated seeds that is distributed across the parties. Now, while this method does not require any communication, the computational cost scales very fast with the number of parties, and therefore it is efficient only for small values of t. On the other hand, it has many applications beyond the context of multi-party computation. So we have several technical contributions. So the first technical contribution is here we show how to generate linear correlations that can support computation of non-SAMD circuits over packed secret sharing, which are generated using PRSS. And here we achieve to avoid the routing mechanism overhead from previous works completely. Our second contribution is a new general PRSS construction with reduced number of seeds and reduced computational cost. If the polynomial degree that we are using is larger than what is required by the security threshold and the hacking parameter, which we denote by D. So in this case, we are able to reduce the storage and the computational cost. And by achieving this, we are able to extend the number of parties for which the PRSS technique can be used. And our third and last technical contribution is cheap straggler resilience. And here we show that if the number of parties is larger than what is required by the polynomial degree, namely that n is strictly larger than 2d plus 1, then we can allow the protocol to proceed even if not all messages have arrived in each round of the execution. Now, this is straightforward to achieve with semi-error security, but with malicious security, this is actually challenging, and this required us to deal with a subset attack due to Guyal et al., which we call the double dipping attack, and we present some new techniques to deal with it. So, combining these three technical contributions, we achieved the following two results. So the first result is a PRSS scheme for sharing degree D polynomials between n parties with a security threshold T, where we make a reduction from a problem called covering designs and show that given a solution to that problem of size k, then our PRSS scheme requires k times d plus 1 times n minus d divided by n PRF seeds per party. And this improves dramatically over the classical construction of Kramer et al. When d is strictly larger than. And in this table, you can see the storage cost, the comparison between our work and the Kramer et al. Work for two special cases. But in the paper, we give many more data points and show that we can improve dramatically over their work when there is a gap between d and t. And as I said before, this result has many applications beyond the context of general MPC. For example, threshold cryptography or secure aggregation, which is important for federated learning, for example, or even the simple task of secure distributed storage, where a dealer wants to secret share a secret across multiple servers. And using PRSS, the dealer only needs to broadcast the offset between the secret that was generated using PRSS and the actual secret. So using our technique, we can do it with less storage and computational cost. And our second result is an MPC protocol. So given security threshold T, tagging parameter L, and number of parties N, we present a new protocol to compute any arithmetic circuit C over a finite field F with S multiplication gates with the following features. So first, the protocol makes only a black box use of any pseudo-random function. Besides that, it is information theoretic. The protocol achieves malicious security against T corrupted parties and tau lost messages in each epoch, where an epoch is defined by 2 rounds, where P1 or any other designated party sends a message to each other party and receives back a message from them. The third property is that if the parties follow the protocol, then it terminates successfully, even if tau messages chosen adaptively by the adversary are dropped in each epoch. And finally, the communication cost is given in this expression. And as you can see, it is reduced as L is increased. And in the paper, we present a comparison where we show that as we increase L and T, then we can beat the best previous protocols while achieving straggler resilience. And with this, I will end my talk. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the wonderful talk. I guess we're just running a little bit over time, but I think that's okay. So any questions from the room or the Zealet chat? Questions from the room so far? So I guess everybody is eager for breakfast. So thanks a lot again for the talk, and thanks everyone in the session. So feel free to connect. The virtual participants should use Zero to connect and sort of ask more questions. The in-person participants can sort of just just talk to each other over here. And we will reconvene in about 22 minutes for the next session. That will be on functional encryption and